Good afternoon, everyone. So may I start the session, please? Okay, welcome to the technical session Financing Green, Resilient and Inclusive Agriculture in Future Today. My name is Mio Oka, Director, Environment, Natural Resources and Agriculture Division in South Asia Department in ADB. And I'll be serving as your moderator for the session. So I'd like to first welcome you to today's keynote speech by Professor Gretchen Daly, Dean Professor of Environmental Science, Stanford University. So may I give quickly the floor to the Professor Daly, please. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Are you able to hear me fine?
Yes.
Excellent. It's a joy to join you and to be a small part of the tremendous movement that ADB is really leading across the world in financing this transformation that we all so urgently need to green, resilient, and inclusive agricultural systems. And I'd like to basically share some updates, some really inspiring demonstrations, and a tiny bit about where we need to head and the opportunity we have to join hands across the world and across many different sectors and leadership in many different arenas to achieve this most urgent and ambitious goal. So I'll just dive in, sharing my slides.
Yes, we do see the slide.
Okay, wonderful. I'm hoping that, does that fill the screen well?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay,
thank you.
Great. So let's just dive in. I'd like to talk about the natural underpinnings of this transformation that we seek, and basically nature as an engine of prosperity, an engine actually of social innovation, and of basically the green inclusive future. And also about ADB as a really inspiring engine of this innovation, social innovation, and many other types of innovation and transformation. So starting off, just to get clear, I'm sure all of you are expert in this, but I hope we have a diverse group. So what is natural capital? Generally, we're referring to the living elements of the biosphere, the systems embodied in Earth's lands, waters, and biodiversity, the many, many millions of different species with whom we share this one planet known to have life in the entire universe. And these systems together in the biosphere make up our life support, the most critical aspect actually underpinning civilization. And the systems involve a lot of players, these millions of, in many cases, very little known species, whether we're talking about bees that pollinate crops, that you can see all the pollen that is electrostatically held to the body of the bee. And that's crucial for producing many of our most nutritious foods like fruits, vegetables, nuts, and other things, a lot of spices and so on. And then other players that also are indirectly hidden heroes in the production system, like these birds, the female on the left and the male royal flycatcher that play key roles in pest control and other regulation of ecosystems and the key support in agricultural systems especially. Many other birds not shown here play key roles in, let's say, tree regeneration in the tropics widely. You know, both birds and bats play crucial roles in dispersing and enabling, basically giving birth to the next generation of trees and maintaining stability on landscapes, flood protection, hydropower and irrigation, water regulation and purification, many other types of benefits, climate security, and storage of carbon, both in soils and above ground in forest ecosystems and agroforests. And then bats in the middle that often get a bad name actually play many, many crucial roles in ecosystems, such as here in this coffee system in Costa Rica, including pollinating and also in pest control. So when we think about landscapes and now taking a broader view, looking across the vistas shown here in different parts of the world, on the left in Central America, on the right in the PRC, we can appreciate or think about nature, natural capital, in the many dimensions in which we depend intimately on it, whether we live in megacities or out in these vast rural and more natural and somewhat more wild landscapes. But how would we ever go about, pinpointing where and in what dimensions of Earth's life support systems we need to invest? What do we need to finance specifically to drive this transformation to green, resilient, and inclusive agriculture? When we look across much of the world, we're seeing rapid transformation to ever more intensive cropping systems and ever less in the way of natural systems supporting them. And it begs a whole variety of questions. Here I tee up three. First of all, how much and where should we protect in order to, number two, benefit and support over the long run people and nature, especially in agriculture? And third, how do we move beyond GDP as a metric for tracking progress in so many dimensions and for guiding investments? So building on these questions and starting about 15 years ago, the Natural Capital Project was launched with the global hub at Stanford, but really engaging as a platform research institutions across the world, and especially implementing institutions to drive the understanding that we need, and to integrate that understanding and drive it through powerful demonstrations, whether in agriculture, like shown here in the left, in megacities, shown here, or in kind of systems, infrastructure like hydropower, integrating it all, and supporting a knowledge platform that enables people all across the world to have access and to make this knowledge basically accessible and actionable. So we're seeing today incredible advances being led by ADB together with other MDBs, the United Nations, other major institutions in the public sector, country governments, as I'll show in a minute, and ever more, though lagging behind, but ever more in the private sector. And what I'd like to do now is just transition to one example to illustrate how this engine of innovation can be deployed to help inform and support and accelerate the transformation that we're seeking. That involves engaging together in developing new science, new knowledge broadly, using the latest in technology to drive open access to data streams, to new technologies for measuring and sensing all kinds of conditions and processes around the planet, both biophysical and more social and economic, informing decisions to support people, whether on a little laptop in remote counties and provinces, or, in country capitals driving policy at the national level to achieve stewardship and well-being. And a lot of what supports this is working together, understanding from ADB and other development banks, for example, where the decisions really are at the forefront for driving this transformation, and what kind of knowledge, what kind of data and other information is needed to inform investments that are planned and underway today. So a lot of science is being generated by it's hundreds to thousands of researchers across the world involved to different degrees in this platform, and integrating it into something that everyone can have access to, this Invest data and software platform for valuing nature or ecosystem goods and services, and the trade-offs associated with alternative investments, policies, practices, and basically pathways or scenarios into the future. So this platform is now being used in most countries, and we just launched in 2021 Invest for urban areas, and that's now being deployed in the first cities worldwide. Now, just to give you an example from the PRC, Invest has been co-developed with the Chinese Academy of Sciences and various universities and other institutions in the PRC, and is used now to do things like zone the country with 50% of the land area prioritized for investments in over 200 million rural people who are the land stewards, providing well-being and benefits to many, many downstream, downwind people. And I'll just show you one example in Hainan Island, the first eco province, a priority ecoregion globally that had massive increase in rubber production and also some other agricultural systems that led to rapid deforestation. And in 2010, when I happened to be there, massive flooding causing over $2 billion in flood damage that really is an underestimate of all of the damages experienced. Working in this beautiful place, we, together with Chinese Academy of Sciences, Zhenghua, and a team with his colleagues, Professor Ouyang and others at CAS and at Xi'an Jiaotong University, we looked at this rubber expansion and loss of forests starting in about 2008, and evaluated, here's Hua here, looking at when there's heavy rain, you can see the water doesn't penetrate into the soil so well. Mostly it pools and then it flashes off of the land. And this leads to rapid flooding. And so in this case, here we are, as the floods started, kind of trying to wait them out under an overhang here, and watching in a natural forest, the water really running clear. But out in the agricultural systems and in the rubber plantations in particular, it's just washing all of the soil away onto the reefs and flooding vast areas of the island. So you can see here a lot of the muddy waters out on the reefs, and a lot of damage that resulted. So what we did was model the central part of the island, this ecological function conservation area, delimited here. So look at that shape, and I'll just show you briefly that same shape we modeled. I'm not going to go into details, but we modeled two main scenarios: no rubber plantation expansion from the 90s when it all really got going, and an intercropped, a more resilient and diversified production system plantation scenario. And then we looked at product, basically production and income, habitat, soil retention, nitrogen retention, and then other things that I can't read right now, but you can read them, that I know are other aspects of water quality and carbon sequestration and so on. And overall, what we found was improved production and also all these co-benefits, the other ecosystem services, and doubled income in the types of systems demonstrated by this farmer here. And this is Ouyang and Hua out working there all together. And this led to developing a national ecological development strategy that's being now scaled up over the PRC. And what it involves more broadly in the scaling, I'll go back, is just integrating these ecological benefits into criteria for performance evaluation by local governments. It also involves creating eco-compensation policy and investment mechanisms and a natural capital accounting system to support all of this. To do this, we've co-developed GEP, Gross Ecosystem Product, with ADB support from the beginning. That's been crucial. And it's basically a metric that can go alongside GDP with a whole accounting system behind it, and answers these questions: where, how, and how much are the benefits? Where do they originate? And who do they actually benefit? It involves the various steps, like on Hainan Island, of collecting data that goes on our shared and open source platform, running the invest models to see who benefits, and calculate nature's contribution to people. And this is now being adopted globally since the UN certified its use in 2021. Colombia, supported by Inter-American Development Bank, got going last summer. Sri Lanka and Mongolia are teed up next with support from ADB. And there are many other countries that are anxious to adopt this. There are also many private institutions asking us now to help them develop ways of integrating this accounting framework into their own decision making. And so all of this leads, here's my last slide, to summarizing and saying this is a really key moment for financial sector leadership, for ADB really playing a key role globally, a very visible and powerful role in driving momentum for mainstreaming these approaches, targeting investments using the latest data and science in very compelling ways, integrating across all the different types of benefits we need to achieve to recover from the pandemic, secure climate, and all the other aspects of livelihoods and well-being to scale and then accelerate this regeneration. So thank you very much for letting me join you, and for all of the inspiration that you bring.
Thank you very much, Professor Daly. Sorry, I had a bit of challenge connecting through my Wi-Fi. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the point, and this is your Invest platform. This is something I've always thought, if we can really expand this to my region, South Asia. So I'd like to really hear more through the question and answer sessions later on today. Thank you. Okay, so let's move into the panel discussion of our session. As being indicated, we have 3 panelists today. First, Mr. Qingfeng Jiang, Chief Rural Development and Food Security Thematic Group, Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department, ADB. And second, Mr. Piet van Asten, Head Sustainable Production System, Coffee, Olam Food Ingredients. And third, Mr. Joost Zuidberg, Management Board Agri-3 Fund. So I would like to just quickly explain the format of this and the next sessions. First, you'll be hearing from the panelists for about 6-7 minutes on his high observations on the key address delivered by Professor Daly. And second, his practical experience on establishing or implementing financing green, resilience, and inclusive agriculture. So then that will give us about 10 minutes for question and answers. Since we have 30 minutes specific session on the Q&As, I'd invite only specific question to clarify the technical aspects from the panelist or Professor Daly. Okay. If you'd like to raise your comments, observations, questions, please start sending your comments and questions in a chat box. Please note, due to limited time, we might not be able to take all questions. However, I will also try to pull the questions, so please do start sending your comments as early as possible. Thank you. So let us quickly move along the panel discussion. Mr. Kim-Fen Jian, could you please provide your insightful observations and summarize ADB's most recent work on innovative financing? Thank you.
Can you hear me, Mia?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. First, I want to share my great appreciation for Professor Daly use her very precious time to share her insights with us. This is a wonderful presentation. Really give us great directions how we're going to conduct this green and also inclusive financing in agriculture. So let me just quickly share 3 key highlights from my perspective on how we can scale nature-based solutions in agricultural sector. The number one is I want to go back to what the ADB committed for this a cumulative $100 billion US dollars climate financing in COP 26 last year. Out of this $100 billion US dollars, you may know $34 billion US dollars target on climate adaptation. Also under the COP 26, President Massa also joined the heads of the other MDBs, also signed the statement on nature, which highlight we need to mainstream the nature into the ADB operations, which also included agriculture as well. So now ADB is now preparing our climate action plan. Climate smart agriculture will be the key priority. And at the same time, we agree among our community to link agricultural, land, water, and also the whole food system together to, whenever we are possible, we also adopted the nature-based solutions. Now come to the second issues here is looking forward, we do have some challenges because nature-based solutions, number one is Professor Danny just mentioned quite difficult to measure and also monitor the impact of the nature-based solutions. And also in terms of the challenges, also a very limited evidence to show the cost-effective solutions related to the new technologies. Of course, across our DMCs, also lack of internal technical capacity and also expertise. And sometimes in terms of the mainstream, the nature-based solutions into our project design, particularly with the rural area, quite challenging. But after the President Master signed the statement on nature, and of course is announces a climate ambition COP26. Of course, as a community, we also realize this is a great opportunity as well. Number one, of course, is in Asia, right where the out of our 4.6 billion population in Asia, 60% of the population live in the rural area. Very rich in the natural capital, including forest, fishery, land, water, and so on and so forth for their living. And also this area also have 30% of the world's arable land, and also most extensive forestry and forestry resources as well. So going forward, I think one of the key priority here for us is introducing the integrated solutions, combine the addressing the climate change, reduces the biodiversity loss, and also they addresses the food insecurity across the Asia Pacific. Number of the example I want to share is through the Ocean Health Program. Right now, we are talking about mitigation through the investing in the blue carbon ecosystem. We can help protect the mangrove and also the coral reef ecosystem, and also the sequestrate the carbon in the coastal area. And also we can scale up blue food, particularly support the sustainable fishery across a coastal area. And same time, we can also support the chemical-free farm that can protect the land, and at the same time also preserve this watershed services as well. And also another example is the precision farming. We can conserve the inputs, increases the yields, reduces the GHG emissions. Now, come to the question Bill, you just mentioned about ADB strategy. We're very proud to share. ADB work with the Stanford University over 12 years already, started from the electro capital accounting, the gross ecosystem product, which now become this aggregating indicator for the UN ecosystem accounting framework already. So from the ADB end, what we're going to do is we're going to adopt this two-pronged strategy. Number one is focus on the climate action and agreement on a target contribution of the electro-based solutions to adapting outcomes. Number two is adopting the full system approach across the world elements and activities that are related to the food supply chains to develop these integrated solutions. And in terms of the approach, we're going to use this regional natural capital lab, which is a regional digital platform related to natural capital accounting, regulatory reform, and also shift away for the DMC's harmful subsidy to the payment for ecological services, and also they introduces the brand financing, and then they build the knowledge, capacity, and also the partnership in our each of the DMCs. Related to the natural capital lab, now we also started to mobilize funding sources to establish innovative natural capital financing facility and to transform the agri-food system. Of course, the natural capital lab is a enabling condition, and we also established the marketplace as a services platform, plus with the natural capital fund, which can combine ADB in financing with our partner investment, and then we can leverage and also they produces this co-benefits. This fund will co-finance projects can convert ecosystem value and also assets into the revenue model of the natural capital investment project, which their case study, Professor Danny just mentioned about this Highland project for this sustainable rubber plantation, and of course is also build this agriculture with the nature. That is a good example. But again, this is doable, and then through this green financing mechanism, we can achieve our target. Let me just pause here, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Qingfeng. Without me making unnecessary comments, let me just quickly move on to the next panelist. Mr. Piet van Osten, please.
Yes, thank you, Miu. Can you hear me?
Yes, clear. Thank you.
Very good. Well, really inspirational feedback already and the presentation. I guess I would have to come from a slightly different angle. Maybe let me explain a little bit, my role and my company. So Olam, of course, Olam Food Ingredients. I mean, Olam is currently being split up in Olam Agri, Global Agri, and Olam Food Ingredients. So just for the people who don't know, of course, we are in 40 countries. We turn over about $10 billion US, work with 2.5 million farmers. So, and we primarily work on cocoa, coffee, spices, edible nuts, and some dairy ingredients, right? So that's where we work globally, of course, but strongly also in Southeast Asia. And I was just first trying to think, how is the nature-based solutions, right? And how is this natural capital and these things, how does that relate to our business? Very strongly at the moment, of course, a lot of our customers, let me talk maybe mostly for coffee because I'm based in the coffee team, but I actually work also with cocoa and the nuts teams, etc. But a lot of our big clients and the big brands that have all come out with statements, during the COVID period around how they want to become climate neutral, how they want to be deforestation free, etc. And of course, even Olam itself, we have made lots of commitments in this area. So the topic is extremely important. But now, and we actually also have a team within Olam that does the finance for sustainability. So they really try to put monetary values on, the natural capital that we are working with, because, a lot of our traders in our origin teams will be looking at their annual P&L, but, to what extent are we actually degrading or improving the natural capital in the operations in the landscapes where we work, right? So we have that team also that has that, let's say, more global, or high level perspective, and tries to think from that angle, whether we're on the right track and what would be needed. Of course, if you would now go all the way down, right, to where the action has to be, I think, Gretchen, when you were presenting, right, some of these scenarios, what if there was no rubber expansion, right? Well, who decides that, right? Yes, you can make policies and you can give recommendations, but in the end, right, farmers are just trying to see how they can, improve their livelihoods and make things better. So our take is really, if we want to change things, it's actually at that lowest granular level, the farmer themselves, right, that will actually have to make that change. And when you look, of course, at these farmers and these farmer communities, you see actually that they are very, very diverse. So, we actually consistently see across our supply chains that in many cases, the top 20, 30% of the farmers supply 20 to 80% of the volume. 50% of the bottom half of the farmers actually are just hanging in there, right? If you would ask them, what would your children to be? It probably wouldn't be a farmer, because they might actually feel even that, farming is just, a way to stay alive, but not necessarily the ticket, out of poverty and into prosperity. So when you actually think, of course, how to motivate these farmers, then it's important, right, to understand what are their constraints. And these constraints can be three things. Knowledge, right? Lack of knowledge about, better opportunities or better technologies. Hey, if you use this way of fertilizing your soil or combating your pesticide, then, you don't have a pesticide problem, which causes a biodiversity problem, etc. Right? So it can be knowledge, it can be access to resources, that can be credit, but it can be inputs, it can be material cost, right? Machinery, or it can be, a lack of ambition, right? What I was earlier saying, the belief that, this is not going to help me maybe, to push myself out of poverty, and any money that I have, I will not invest it, right, in the farm to try to improve the natural capital, to go long term and build that sustainability, but I'm trying to do other things, right? So I see this is where, of course, these farmers can be greatly valuable. Of course, also it depends on the country. It depends on the strength of the local institutions. It also depends, on the product. And even within a product like coffee, you have a differentiation, I would say, for example, between bulk Robusta, where there is very little incentives from the private sector, for sustainability premiums. And then you have more the fine, arty, crafty, high quality coffee like, Northern Sumatra Aceh, where we can really get good premiums. And therefore, it's much more, and we have clients who want to see, that natural capital, that landscape improve, and it's much more easier to work long-term with them, right? So the challenge, I guess, that we have is that we have very diverse origins, diverse products, diverse farmers, and therefore it's not one problem, right, with one solution. I think then, if we go into the financing, of course, in a lot of the things that we try to do is to try to find those site and farmer specific solutions. If we don't go down to that nitty-gritty detail, then it's not possible, right, to actually change these behaviors. And also, there are also, of course, interactions and interdependencies there as well. If you work, for example, as you train them how to improve their yield, but you see that actually the landless farmers, or those who have very little land, and struggle, they're not the ones, which have maybe the most financial capital and social capital. They don't even maybe come to your training. They're not maybe part even of your supply chain. They are the ones, right, that would go, into the forest and, be the drivers of the deforestation, right? So how do you capture these different actors, right? And of course, that is where OLAM as a private sector, we have a strong role to play in there. But that also requires, this multi-stakeholder partnerships, right? At that landscape level, you need to have the public institutions, you need to have the private sector, right? Come together with, of course, local communities and create a lot of that ownership. The people on the ground will have to develop that. I think a lot of is currently being said also around digital, right? Digital ways to give people access to finance, digital ways to give people access to technology, information. Of course, again, not everybody is connected in the same way. I may be throwing up some challenges, but of course, in many of the areas, right, we are working, right, with farmers through digital tools, giving them real-time information about weather, about soils, about input use, etc. So I think, where I see, are some of the challenges that a forum like this, right, could work on would be like indeed, these trade-offs across time. A lot of the credit, for example, that's available also for smallholder farmers, credit is quite risky. Therefore, of course, when there is appetite, the interest rates are fairly high often, and the duration is often fairly short, 1 to 2 years. But when you look, for example, at perennial tree crops, you often need to look at 5, 6, 7 years, if you want to improve a variety so that it's less pest sensitive, etc. Then, of course, these are the issues that you would have to work on. And I think maybe that's it. I was also just seeing a time alert. So I think let me stop here for now. Thanks, Mio.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Austin. Thank you. I'm sure there will be some time left, so we can perhaps ask you follow-up questions. Thank you. So let me also turn and hear what Mr. Yo Seidberg can share. I'm very personally very interested and excited to hear the work on Agri-3 funds. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Oka. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My institution, Cardano Development, exists with urgency to try and improve the role of financial products and financial sector in achieving a number of goals related to the SDGs. And I would like to speak today about specifically agriculture. What we usually do is look at whether existing value-adding chains of financial products need to be reinforced, whether new institutions need to be created, or whether products can be improved so that a certain desired outcome can better be achieved. And in the context of agriculture, speaking as a very generalist financial practitioner here, I am seeing quite a number of unique and fairly complex and large challenges which need to be addressed. And I think Professor Daly was very, very articulate in showing what needs to be done. And I was very pleased to hear also from Piet van Asten about how complex some of the solutions must be. So it is clearly a very important and also complicated matter, but with a great prize, which needs to be developed with urgency, obviously, given the speed at which the globe is going in the wrong direction. I would classify the issues that need to be looked at in a few number of categories that are very specific to agriculture. One, and I think a very important one, is the last mile issue, how to reach farmers for all sorts of inputs like Piet was talking about. And not least, linking up to your financial product that you want to get to that farmer. And I think here the great prize would be to unlock digital solutions so that this last mile issue can be fixed with acceptable cost. And we see a lot of examples of that being developed in the last 10 years. And we hope, with great hope, that this is a great, useful tool. Even before climate change, of course, farmers face very, very daunting climate risks in many places, which has really discouraged financial institutions to engage with farmers. Obviously, crop risks, flood risks, all sorts of in many places, frequently recurring disastrous matters, but also less spectacular climate risks need to be fixed. And I think here, what we believe the biggest solution direction is the better sharing of risks across various actors, including, of course, the operational partners within the chain, but certainly the insurance world, when presented with the right product at the right price, will certainly be able to play an increasingly important role. And finally, again, also as Piet was referring to, purely the complexity of the total solution and the need to understand this, and the need to formulate better what it is you're trying to achieve, so that you don't disincentivize important key parts of your solution, is quite a daunting task, especially if you try and find a solution that scales to many farmers across many regions and many commodities. And then on top of that, the obvious urgency of climate adaptation issues is coming really to the fore. Now, what are where is the positive in this story is that we believe that the financial, the end of the financial value chain, being investors, banks, institutional investors, is tremendously mobilized at this moment in time to do good, besides chasing profits, to also contribute to the SDG goals. And agriculture is a key component to that. We see that many investors and banks stand ready to to participate in this, but need to be told what to do. They need to be provided with the right products through the right platforms. So as a financial actor, we try to look at how to present that platform to the right institutions. This must be a value chain approach. We cannot, as a financial institution sitting in Europe, have any ambition to reach the last mile. So we must work with partners. We see partners in the local banks. We see partners in the likes of Olam and other aggregators who are all very, very interested to participate in this. The main product that we have decided to use for various parts, but also for this agricultural matter, is the use of guarantees, so that we introduce investors, institutional investors and banks to, let's say, long-term finance with de-risking from the guarantees, so that it fits their investment criteria. The guarantees are created with the support of capital coming from governments, multilateral institutions, and other policy-driven investors, if you want to put it that way. And the benefit of guarantees is that you do engage the parties that are guaranteed, so the institutional investors or the banks, in the product itself and in the participation, so that they not only provide their money, but also start participating in thinking about risk solutions. In Agri-3, the fund that we co-manage, the most specific strategy here is to work with banks that have farmer clients who already service the farmers, perhaps with working capital, but use guarantees to provide these banks with the possibility to provide much longer term finance for better land use, regenerative technologies, spare trees, but also replant. So in general, looking for ways to support the anti-deforestation and better land use possibilities. Number one, so guarantees is our solution. And secondarily, we try and participate in the dissemination of better intelligence about these practices. And I much applaud Professor Daly's focus on creating widely used benchmarks, such as GEP, so that we better know what we talk about. I would like to conclude by saying, again, from a perspective of a generalist financial practitioner, I consider agriculture and the better, more sustainable use of agriculture to be both very urgent as well as extremely complicated and daunting. And so the positive that I see is that we have a network of parties within which we operate, and I see a great willingness to try and do better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zeidbach. So as you can see, we are a bit running out of time. What I'd like to do here is we heard the importance of digital technology. We heard the importance of risk sharing, and I see some participants asked about, what is to strike, what we can do to strike the balance between the extractive industry and also the project to benefit farmers. So there's a delicate balance, because I work in India, for example, and that they'd like to produce ethanol from bamboos. So how can we know that the climate action is important, but there is a possibility of exploiting the resource that they have. And also they may or may not benefit the farmers. So along these lines, I'd like to come back to you, all panelists, to pose these kind of questions during the Q&A session. Thank you very much. So let me try to organize the second session. And so this is a succeeding session on the reflect and the rethink for revision, experience sharing, voices from development practitioners, farmers, and the youth and women. And here, I hope we can see the representatives or the participants. So first participant or the speaker is Ms. Kisa Mufaria. So she is a lead environment and climate specialist, Asia and the Pacific region from IFAD. Let me just check. Okay, as you can see on the screen. And Mr. Stephen Hart, Senior Loan Officer from European Investment Bank. And third, Mr. Arnold Hackman, Principal Urban Development Specialist from ADB. Again, I shall first ask participants to share her ground experience on establishing or implementing financing green resilience in the inclusive agriculture. Again, for 6 to 7 minutes. And after that, we're going to go back to a Q&A session. So I will also pick up some of the questions raised or included in a chat box. Thank you. Kisa, are you able to start, please?
Thank you very much, Mio, and thank you very much for the panelists who have joined us today. It's a great pleasure to have this opportunity to speak to you. I will start by saying that currently we have a very rich body of knowledge that is informing us on how critical adaptation to climate change is, particularly for smallholder farmers, and how important their contribution is to global food production, which currently stands at 1/3 of the world's food production. But on the other hand, climate change is estimated to reduce the crop yields by up to 1/4 by the end of this century, with extreme weather events increasing in regularity and intensity, and now compounded by aspects like the COVID-19 pandemic and what we are seeing that is coming out of what is happening in Ukraine. But despite this rich body of knowledge, also what we are seeing from data that we have analyzed is that less than 2% of climate finance has actually been targeted to smallholder farmers. My organization, the International Fund for Agriculture Development, IFAD, mandate is to work with these smallholder farmers. They are our clients, and their livelihoods are directly dependent on agricultural productivity. So by way of investing in these rural communities, we are empowering them to increase their food security, improve the nutrition of their families, and increase their incomes while ensuring that the ecosystems onto which their livelihoods are dependent on continue to provide the critical services such as water supply, fertile soil, and non-timber forest products. We also support the rural poor in building their resilience against different climate shocks, while at the same time ensuring that our investments are gender responsive, nutrition sensitive, and create employment for the youth through a model of integrated food systems or value chain models. So in 2012, IFAD established the largest multi-donor global fund, which aims at channeling climate finance to smallholder farmers to enable them to adapt and build their resilience to climate change. This financing instrument, we call it the Adaptation for Smallholder Agriculture Program, ASAP. It has today invested approximately US dollars 300 million, build resilience of approximately 8 million farmers, and 1 million hectares of land have benefited with increased climate resilience practices. The fund was designed in understanding that smallholder farmers are on the front line of climate change. They inhabit some of the most vulnerable landscapes, such as hillsides, rangelands, arid lands, floodplains, and rely on climate-sensitive natural resources for their livelihood. As a result, they are at significant risks from increasing temperatures, erratic rainfall, rising sea levels, and extreme weather events such as flooding, droughts, and storm surges. So in the rethinking and reflecting, the question I was asking is, what has IFAD learned for the past 10 years that can strategically guide us into the future in terms of financing through green finances? I would like to talk about the space where there is a relationship between risk, climate shocks, and poverty reduction, and the need to transition now to food systems that are being introduced. On one hand, we are seeing that the role of financing is getting full recognition, and you might have seen during the COP27, there was a very clear call on channeling funding to climate adaptation. And therefore, funding, or the role of financing, is now becoming a partner in this transition. We are learning how critical it is to establish connections between finance and the food transition systems that are required. But I want to talk about our smallholder farmers that are our clients. So although we are talking about the patterns, the practices, or the food systems that they have to transition to, they are at the center of that risk, as what my previous colleagues have said. And when farmers shift their practices, it typically takes 2 to 3 seasons before they can fully adapt to the changing seasons or adapt to these measures that we are introducing and practices that they can use or they can apply to cope with the climate shocks that they are facing. So that is a very risky phase, and the farmers are quite vulnerable. We have to think about how then do we bridge this risk of the farmers. And what I see here is the potential opportunities that partners have in the financial sector come together and de-risk some of these transitions at the time when the farmers are transitioning from one practices, from one to the other. Observations suggest that the importance of financial engineering becomes critical or important. And one practical aspect that we have piloted, and it's very successful, is perhaps I will call it bundling or combining flow of funds with different risk management technologies and practices. We bring the farmers together in an aggregator model and provide the extension services to this aggregator model. But at the same time, you're looking at different financing instruments that are available and try to see how can you engineer or how can you structure them in a way that it will reduce the risk, encourage farmers to invest more and produce more, and also generate more income to them. In that way, you are meeting all the parameters that you have set at the start of the model. We are using 2 instruments here at IFAD. We have the environment and social impact assessments, but the one aspect that is very much pronounced in IFAD is that as part of this environmental and social impact assessment, we really deliberately and consciously look at climate risk assessment. So we do a very comprehensive analysis that generates data that informs us what is the historical and projected climate trends over time. And therefore we use that data now to come up with what are the agronomic parameters that we should introduce to the farmer. Emerging evidence now shows that genetically encoded risk management technologies, which includes aspects like tolerant crop varieties, can achieve some of the same benefits as financial instruments. We are seeing significant positive results in Bhutan, in Nepal, in Cambodia, where a combination of rigorous climate risk analysis, application of agroecological practices, permaculture, and other climate smart agriculture practices within an aggregator model, what we call climate smart villages, are resulting in building resilience of smallholder farmers in the long run. Where are we now? We are currently designing subsequent phases of this project to scale up the models in other geographical areas, which is a very positive signal that our bundling model or combining different financing instruments is really working. And if the tools are effective and provide value, farmers will use them to increase their ability to choose improved inputs, to expand and diversify, or to try new and innovative practices that produce more food while not damaging the natural capital on which their livelihoods depend on, and eventually build their climate resilience. Over to you, Mio.
Thank you very much, Kisa. I do record the we are learning from your experience from Nepal. Thank you. And let me turn to the next speaker, please. Yes. So, Mr. Stephen, please come in, please. Thank you.
Well, thank you for letting me join this session. So I'm Stephen Hart. I work at the European Investment Bank. So for lack of a longer explanation, we're the ADB of Europe. I think that the story I'm going to be telling here is a bit along the same lines as the previous speaker, you know, trying to express some of the experiences that we've gained, at least. So for the last few years, I've been the focal point for the Natural Capital Financing Facility. Now, it was set up, in fact, it was designed about 8 years ago and became operational in 2015. So we've been working at this now for about 6-7 years, and I think we have some stories to tell. What's interesting about the Natural Capital Financing Facility, that it was quite visionary. Already then, you know, the idea was to look at nature and climate as a combined topic. And so it had two legs. One was biodiversity and the other one was nature-based climate adaptation. What can be said is that it was designed as a fairly pure play nature finance instrument. So the idea was really to pick up business models based on ecosystem services to see if they were bankable. It also took a very market-based approach, building in a way on our traditional role as a cornerstone investor. So I'm just going to present, like, in 1 minute the key conclusions of 7 minutes of work, right? So certainly we've managed to find a variety of business models, I think, which is really interesting. We've applied also a variety of financing techniques. The two areas in which I think we managed to close most deals and sizable deals were in urban green infrastructure, and the other in forestry. Unfortunately, and it wasn't for lack of, say, applications and interest, but agriculture rather eluded us. And there are a number of reasons there. But fundamentally, say, in Europe, the issue of land is very sensitive. So as a bank, it's very difficult for us to engage with land-based strategies that imply, say, purchase of land, for example. But one of the key challenges that we've met, at least, is that the price of land in Europe effectively has priced out many transformational strategies. And just the sheer availability of land has been a problem, to find large coherent pieces of land in a way to transform, because land ownership is quite fragmented. And again, the price of land makes it very difficult. But ultimately, I think the biggest challenge here was that we were going in with a market-based instrument into a market that's effectively not working. So we were using de-risking to compete with free money. And that free money was going into these harmful subsidies largely. And you know, that is always going to be challenging. So I would say our overall experience has been that of like a venture capital fund. So we've had maybe 100, 150 deals coming in, and 10, 20 coming out at the other end. Well, I think so going forward, I think there are two things we're working on now. I think one is that we require something which is more early stage, say real seed capital. Not necessarily market-based, but really high-risk capital, even small contributions. And what we also found is that biodiversity and natural capital we found embedded in many other strategies. So picking up on that, you know, we want to work on the mainstreaming aspect, and that really brings me now to you know what we're doing going forward. So you may have heard of the European Green Deal. And this is from an EU perspective, really quite an unprecedented ambition and a very broad package. So we're talking about actual financing and funding at an unprecedented level for green topics. We're talking a package of legislation. We're talking about, say, more technical assistance, and all this together really is creating this, say, make or break moment. And what's interesting about this ambition is that it really came to be during the COVID crisis. Now, you might have thought that the COVID crisis would have undermined this agenda, but in fact, the various European capitals really held on to this. Of course, the invasion of Ukraine is going to be the next test, you might say, of these ambitions. But so far, I think it's really only exposing even more our vulnerabilities, and I think we'll reinforce this agenda. In the short term, there might be some, say, distractions, but I think people will hold on to this. But it's important to remember that these underlying conflicts that we have, say, in land use, you know, they won't be resolved that quickly. And what we see is that even though there is a large drive, more financing, more funding, reforming of subsidies, whatever, at least from the food sector and agriculture sector, there's still very much a wait and see attitude. I think the details of many of these instruments, I think, are not understood by the farmers, and it's very difficult for them to take them to heart, really. But what we also see is that, you know, the financial sector, at least certain financial institutions, are very exposed to these sectors. It's no secret that you know the level of debt held, say, in the farming sector is quite significant, and in many banks this is an issue, and they're holding on to these farmers on their balance sheets. But it is a rather a frozen conflict in a way. But it's also an opportunity, because these banks have a huge motivation really to engage with this, because this is the main challenge facing their client, and they need to be where these challenges are, as it were. So really what it's all about, I think, is recognizing these complexities, and that it's not a pure play approach, but it's people have spoken about value chain approaches. I mean, so at least from the EU level, you know, some people will know about the EU taxonomy, which is at a, say, capital market level. We're now being asked, really, when we have promoters coming to the bank to engage, there are fancy words like sustainability proofing or greening. But the point is that whenever we have clients, we want to go into like a dialogue with them to shift as much as what they're doing, say, into say more say green strategies. Certainly finance as we know it is going to be challenged, because we find it very difficult, say from the banking sector, to deal with the need for transformational finance. And what I mean by that, of course, is long dated, but also long grace periods in a way for this transformation. The farmers need, say, a couple of years to transform their businesses. And for that, I think, you know, the role of government in de-risking is fairly unavoidable. But we need to do this in a smart way, but also an effective way. And I think if you look at maybe the biggest paradox of the way we've supported agriculture in the past is that in spite of all the support that's been provided, it seems as a sector, it never lost that sense of insecurity. And I think when there's a sense of insecurity, it's very difficult to create change. So I think these are the things we need to take to the lowest level, as people have spoken about. But I mean, ultimately, if we look at natural infrastructure or say nature-based solutions, natural capital, which is really closer to traditional notions of infrastructure finance, then we need to take inspiration from how infrastructure finance works, which is really heavily based on regulation to enable long-dated finance. I think while we're shifting from this pure play to a more cross-cutting approach, I think it's also very important to not overcomplicate things, because I think there's some just fundamental basic things that we also need to, whatever we do, we need to test against, which is that there's some simple or deceptively simple problems. I mean, to avoid logging old trees, for example, you know, it should be unacceptable now. The eutrophication problem is every bit as significant, for example, as climate change. In fact, they're highly interlinked on the ground. So stopping pollution is as important as ever. It should fundamentally be unacceptable to see large marine areas dying off from nutrient loading. Removing connections or barriers on rivers, again, it's a fairly, you know, it really does not, is not beyond the wit of mankind really to deal with these issues. So while we're dealing with these, say, complexities, let's also not forget that this is about questioning ourselves: are we addressing the basic issues out there as we go along? So I think that's over to you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I really, perhaps I will seek your guidance later on the bilateral setting. Then I'd like to know about your financing facility as well. Thank you. Okay, let me move on to our colleague. Arnold, are you there?
Yes, I am, Mio.
Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mio, and I'm very happy to be here. So many very interesting feedback. I will try to be brief because there is so much to say. But I would like to start, you know, with what has been said, you know, many times before, the complexity. You know, the complexity is there, you know, because we are the confluence of complex human system and complex natural system. So the solution is automatically, you know, has to be first comprehensive. It cannot be discrete anymore. You cannot see only one sector or only urban or only rural. It has to be really comprehensive and integrated. So sector has to be defined as synergetic, you know, approach to solve the solution. And because of course there is an emergency and because there is anyhow a lack of funding that we can provide, it has to be transformative. So whatever we do, we have to implement a systematic transformation. It means that those solutions needs to shift the paradigm shift, change the paradigm shift, actually, change the paradigm, but in a sustainable way. So we are not talking about discrete change, but, you know, very transformative approach. And, you know, again, I would like to mention that what is at stake also, it's the linkage between urban economy and rural economy. And most of the time, you know, and this is critical in terms of development, when urban economy is disconnected with rural economy, then it creates a lot of challenges and issue and underdevelopment and impact on the nature. So because of that, because of those solutions, of course, the finance solution has to be the same. It has to be comprehensive, integrated, and transformative. And what I'm talking here is we have to use whatever we have, and it has been said before. We have to use grant, we have to use a loan for private sector development, incentives for elders and grant for elders or farmers to change their behavior and accommodate to the change into the system, but also loan for infrastructure. So again, we have to be mindful of all those items. And actually, I would like to say we need to have a solution-based finance. So first, a solution has to be designed, and most of the time, I would say it's a territorial solution. You have to see, geographically, what is your territory, how it works, and what are the specific solution that has to be implemented, and how you integrate it into a comprehensive approach. So those are big words, but let me maybe take an example of what we do in Mongolia, because, for example, in Mongolia, rural area is facing a huge issue of rangeland degradation, and rangeland degradation is due to the increase of livestock. Livestock number have been multiplied by 3 during the last 10 years. Okay, and this is mainly due to elders' vulnerability, and especially vulnerability to climate change, because there is no value chain, because there is no cooperative, and because there is no safety net for them. The only safety net they have is to increase the number of animals. So what do we do about that? Yes, you can help them. You can provide grant to have a better rangeland management, irrigation system to produce fodder, build cooperative, provide working capital through grant. But if there is no market linkage, when you do that and it stops, then it's not sustainable. And if you are in a system where pre-processing and processing facilities are not at the point of need, but thousands or kilometers away in the capital city, in this case Ulaanbaatar, how you really create this linkage? So on that also, you have to invest in small cities. You have to make small cities to be more attractive, develop small agro park for the SMEs and business to be located at the point of need, close, in this case, to herders, to create this link. And then, so it's all about financing here. I'm talking about financing infrastructure, grant financing for herders, incentives, etc., or to develop a cooperative or animal health, etc. But then what we do also is we have this financial intermediation instrument. So we use that to create the link. And what we say to them, we invest only if you are going to buy from herders who have been committed to sustainable rangeland management, decreasing the animal, better grazing practice that you also encourage. And you have to be located at the point of need in the small cities nearby the herders. And only through this kind of triangle approach at the territorial basis, then we expect to make a transformative shift of the way it is developed. So for that also we have to be very opportunistic. So for example, in this case, if the number of animals decrease and if the rangeland regenerate, then the carbon sequestration in the soil increase. A huge number actually for rangeland. Of course, not at the hectare, but rangeland are vast. So if you transform that, the carbon sequestration in the soil is increasing a lot, and you have a high figure of climate mitigation. Therefore, you can use climate finance for adaptation and mitigation at the same time. And on this one, we are working with the Green Climate Fund for providing grants and very low interest rate, very concessional loan. And we are working also with the European Investment Bank to invest in infrastructure. So what I mean is we have to use different flow of financing for different use to achieve the overall transformative and comprehensive solution. I think I'm going to stop there. I can talk a lot if you want, but I think my time is done now. Thank you.
Thank you, Arno. Really appreciate it. So let us now, without any break, let us move on to this question and answer session. It's a slightly earlier, but we have about 30 minutes to share your views. And first, I see that Piet kindly responded to many of the questions raised in the chat box. Thank you very much indeed. And so I took moderator's prerogative to ask my questions. So I have two questions. One is, you know, that digital technology is very important, and I see that a lot of us collected data from, and if Professor Daly is still there, I'd like to seek her views. You know, we always concerned about the unit of data collection. You presented in your presentation that the data that really covered all over China or the region or the province. So what do you see in looking at this nature-based solution or the assessing the vulnerability of the area? What would be the appropriate unit of the collecting data? That's one thing I'd like to hear from you. And of course, please feel free to share your observation on the presentation made by others. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I should say, first of all, that I've really enjoyed the presentations of this whole group, and I thank Qingfeng and you, Mio, and others for organizing this. And I hope to get to know you more in some way as we go forward in this shared mission. And then to answer your really good question, Mio, I'd love to hear from others. I am not sure. It's the middle of the night for me, and I might not be giving you the smartest answer, but I would say that first of all, it really depends on the decision that we're trying to make and on the kinds of financial and policy mechanisms involved. So in the context, for example, of flood protection, sometimes relatively coarse data are sufficient to understand the risk that might be elevated by farming practices that involve removing remaining tree cover in very steep areas, like in the upper reaches of the Yangtze River or other river basins where the biophysical processes have been understood for some decades, and the eco-hydrologic interactions of vegetation with rainfall events and general patterns, where those are well known, then sometimes I think pretty coarse data, you know, if you've kind of understood the processes in some places that are well studied and such, then coarse data for other regions might be sufficient to give pretty good confidence that you understand and can model the risks. But in other situations, you really need very fine scale data. And an example for that surprised me, I'm just learning as I get into different fields involving natural capital and risk and financing and so on. Another area is coastal resilience, and what are the impacts of, let's say, degrading or destroying coral reefs or mangrove forests or seagrass beds, you know, along coastlines. What are the implications of removing or just, you know, degrading that natural capital for the risk of people and property? And there are many data layers involved, but one of them is bathymetry, the exact details of how deep the sea surface is along coastlines, and bathymetry is relatively poorly known. And there are a lot of devils in the details. And we found this out even off of the coast of Texas, where you would think the data would be pretty good, but it turns out that Dow Chemical, a major company, has its largest plant in the world off of the coast, kind of east of Houston, where there's, interestingly, the highest return frequency of hurricanes in the whole world. And they were wondering whether they should protect the remaining marshland at their Freeport, Texas plant, or whether it was okay to develop that and create even more of an industrial area. And it turns out that the answer is highly dependent on these details. And in fact, their site at Freeport is not well protected with even the marshland. They decided to keep the marshland because having it greatly reduced the cost and risk, to which they were exposed. But had their plant been located just a few kilometers to the east near Galveston, there's much more protection there because of this kind of detail. And I give that as one of many examples I now know about. So it's a good question. And I think the bottom line is the science community needs to know better from all of you working in policy and finance mechanisms to drive change and leadership and innovation here, so that we can prioritize data and model development that will support the transformation as much as possible. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Really, it reminds me of the challenges that I faced with our coastal projects in India. Thank you indeed. Kisa, sorry, without quite prior notice, I'd like to also ask you a similar question. So you explained that, a lot of data collected through environmental impact assessment. So that takes a project as a unit of intervention, right? But do you, as an organization, how do you approach the unit of data? For example, you have several projects in Nepal. So is it like you will look at the more provincial level or the country as a whole, or you still look at the data collection at the project level? Thanks, Kisa.
Yes, thank you very much, Mio, for that excellent question. When we are carrying out the environmental and social impact assessments, we normally look at it at the project level. And therefore, the unit of analysis for collecting our data is normally the project. And this happens at the early stages of the process itself. So at the scoping stage, where we have a preliminary idea of what the objectives are, what is the nature of the activities, where is the geographical location, we start delineating the boundaries in what we call an area of influence. And an area of influence can be the direct geographical location onto which the activities will be implemented, but also we are also looking at the cumulative impact of other projects that are invested in that particular geographical or area, which might affect the viability of our investment. So that scoping process is at the early stage is extremely important. And we have our own policies and laws that guide us. However, at the strategic level, we do have another instrument. It's more like a strategic document that we prepare at the beginning of our financing cycle after 3 years.
Okay.
And that is when we look at what are the impacts of the interventions or the projects that we are trying to invest during that particular period of time. But we don't go into the granularity of the risks and impacts, and we allow the projects to go into the granularity. But we do have the idea to guide us what type of data we should collect. It's very interesting what I heard from Professor Daly about the coastal areas. It was very interesting, though you might do the bathymetry, but we were doing the assessment on the coastal zone of Bangladesh.
Oh,
and
yeah.
we realized that the excretion rates are very high. As we are doing the assessment, the land is moving. And you might find that after you have collected your data, there is no land. So right now we have decided to do a hydromorphological study to see, to assess these patterns and what is the data that is coming up to inform us what kind of intervention we should prioritize. So the project has stopped. We are waiting for that feedback. Over.
Thank you, Kisa. Yes, we do have exactly the same experience in Bangladesh as with regard to several large rivers. Thanks. And so as inspired by Stephen, I'd like to ask other panelists, particularly Piet and Joost, that I'm interested in hearing, learning unsuccessful examples. You know, what worked and what didn't work. We have a lot of, we do hear a lot of cases that worked well. But I also like to hear, you tested this, but for some reason, maybe the government or the farmers, this didn't work. So perhaps first, Piet, if you had this kind of example, could you kindly share that with us? And then I ask you to share with us next. Thank you. As long as you can.
Thanks. Yeah, can you hear me, Mio? Yes, okay, good. Now, I mean, it's always a bit challenging, right, to say what didn't work, but I'll still try to have a go at it. And I think, I alluded very briefly to that in my earlier remarks, right, that, for example, market signals, right, and market incentives can be very different for different crops in different regions. And I just wanted to go back, for example, to that example of Indonesia and coffee. So we work in Sumatra, right? The south of Sumatra is lowland, you have a big national park there on the southwest, which is being enclosed, right? And we have Robusta farmers. And we have then, in central and northern provinces, Aceh, Berastagi, we have Arabica coffees, right? High quality, wet hulled, some premium coffees. So this is an area, right, where it works very well because, because of the premium coffee and the demand for the quality, we invest ourselves, right, in infrastructure, in people, in outreach to farmers. We train farmers, right? We are worried also about, pesticide use. We try to take actions right on these fronts. A lot of these farmers, grow vegetables. We love vegetables, but insects, of all the crops, vegetables are the most attacked. If they're easy to eat for us, they're definitely easy to eat for insects, right? So then you have a lot of, pesticides being sprayed. But I would say, right, we have there actually a project where even ADB, is providing some support. And but we're there, right? We have a big rollout of registering farmers, providing premium prices, giving technical support. Is really the kind of things, we work on agroforestry, think long term with the clients as well that we have there. This is a setup, where I would say this works. But then you say, oh well, let's extrapolate it everywhere. Then you come to Robusta, right? This is the bottom end, of the coffee market. It's the soluble coffee. When you buy soluble coffee, you never see at the back of the pack, right, that this coffee was produced by Juan, and Juan, since he got access to this program, he can send his children to school. No, soluble coffee is, you throw it in the pot. There is no description, whatever, right? So this is a market, where you go for the lowest price, and clients, that we have, of course, have made formidable commitments regarding forests, regarding biodiversity, etc. But when they buy, right, they say, yeah, but I can buy sustainable coffee elsewhere, further away from the forest edge, Because here, the Forest Edge, you do a lot of work with Wildlife Conservation Society. You try to make conservation agreements with individual farmers. You try to work with the forest authorities. You work with these communities and engage with them. That's a lot of work, right? Now we are a private company. We invest, our resources, but in the end, right, we can't be an NGO. We can't keep on pouring money and not see anything back, right? So we have to recover. If we want to have these communities, this coffee, moved out separately, there will be a cost, right? The infrastructure, the road infrastructure is poor. Segregating these supply chains is a challenge, etc. When you now basically say to the private sector, hey, this is the cost, right? The additional cost of doing this work. They say, well, but I can find cheaper, sustainably labeled, certified coffee elsewhere in Sumatra, right? Not on the Forest Edge. So let me just go and buy it there. So yes, these are, I wouldn't say though, we are still passionately working on trying to crack that nut. But I would say sometimes, the market signals themselves are not strong enough to be able to make that transition. I think, a lot of the colleagues here talked about that transition, the time it takes, right, the resources it takes. And I think, there are cases where there is not enough drive and incentive and funding available, in the private sector itself to actually make these transitions possible. So yeah, does that help?
Very much so, yeah, because since we work in the public sector, we are always interested how this private sector balance the investment and the profit. So this is very helpful to understand that. Thank you. And Joost, please.
Yes, thank you, Mia. We were involved in 2 projects that we had to discontinue after investing sustainable effort. One was to develop a fully coverage financial system, I would think, a platform to service smallholder farmers in Southern Africa. And the other was the establishment of a Pan-African commodities exchange. In both cases, the discontinuation I would classify mostly as a little bit as what Stephen Hart was saying, the impossibility to keep things simple. We found out that if you want to provide the right kind of loans to smallholder farmers, and as Piet was saying, smallholder farmers look at debt with a very watchful eye because it's high risk to them. If they face climate problems and cannot repay the loan, that really is deeply deeply disruptive to their life. To provide the right product, we found that you'd have to tell the farmer that in case of a catastrophic event such as a flood or a drought, they don't have to repay that loan, which means that you have to engage insurance. That combined with the last mile issue, the high cost of reaching the farmer and explaining the product properly, meant that we had to find aggregators who are themselves very well aware how complicated this can be. And we ended up having to solve too many problems at the same time. And the project just blew out of proportion for us. We are not a multilateral institution that can deploy a very large number of people. So I think the same as Piet was saying, you have to keep things economically workable. And it was impossible to do for us. The same applied to this Pan-African commodities exchange, where we were perhaps a bit naive to think that you could do that without the extensive system in place, for instance, warehousing and certification that needs to be put in place in Africa first before you can have any functioning, let's say, synthetic institutions such as an exchange to create better price discovery. So to conclusion, the big risk that we've seen is sort of expanding complexity of your solution.
it is really absolutely true that we always want to cater all kind of needs of farmers as well as organization, and we end up with providing a lot of solution that is beyond our capacity and our clients' capacity. So I'm glad to know that is also happening in your field as well. Thank you so much. Okay, so again, we heard from Stephen a lot about the issues. So I just would like to also seek his guidance or the view, maybe the risk sharing mechanism of action that was undertaken or by EIB, which you think it may work in the context of Asia from your point of view. If you have such idea, could you share it with us?
Yes, I'll do my best to translate Europe into Asia.
Sorry.
No, I think what maybe what we haven't implemented yet in Europe, but I think will be where we need to go, and I think pretty much everyone will need to realize, is that we need to approach, I think, this sector, I mean, natural capital and say land-based sectors, maybe they're similar to where we approach other sectors, which is that projects have phases, and they each require their own kind of instrument. See, that there isn't one instrument that can cope with all these things, and so what we need is, as I mentioned, seed capital, I think, which we haven't really had for this sector. We know from the technology sectors. I mean, we happily pour in, say, seed innovation finance, for example, as sort of seed grants, seed equity. We don't have that for this sector, and we do need this. I think also that when we then go to the next phase, say where we're scaling up to something which is more commercial, I think we need to realize also that in this sector, compared to other, say, infrastructure sectors, we're always dealing with something which is a factor 10 smaller. So, whereas if you go to a first scale bioeconomy plant, you're dancing around with 30, 40, 50 million for your first scale plant. Look, in this sector, we're more down by the single digits, and that has fundamental implications for cost coverage, how to manage these instruments, but also the kind of de-risking. So even in the next stage up, we're still talking impact finance, where we probably need something more close to first loss de-risking. The fact is that when we're dealing with, say, pari passu, where we're sharing, say, the exposure, it doesn't change the color of anything. The risk that people keep, it still changes. It hasn't changed the character, right? So we need to find a new way of de-risking, actually, at scale and for impact, which is a lot of factors to bring into what you might think were relatively mature business models, but we are still in the small and the risky and the transformation. Going beyond that, we are seeing more market-based commercial, say, ventures in some areas. So we see, say, a lot of corporate interest, which I think is also driving, say, more commercially driven equity funds and investment funds into things like forestry. What is the main bottleneck there is really in terms of skill. If we look at, say, the European context, and I don't know, there's probably similar analogies, say in Asia, is that the fact is that there are still only a relatively few players who have the partners, who are the partners, who have the skills to scale up sustainable forestry, scale up sustainable agriculture. So there's a massive, say knowledge, data, training need there at the commercial end. So maybe that's kind of, I think, sums up.
Yes, thank you. It's very helpful because, yes, you're right. And this really, yes, so that's why you explained well, because that's really driving us now to really learn from you and like organization like EIB, because we're also interested in introducing impact finance fund, and also a kind of the mechanism that can accumulate a private investors' interest. So, and also we have to also find a way to strengthen our pipeline for future as well. So this all comes with it. So I'm very thankful for your observations, and definitely I will get back to you. Thanks, Stu. And now, so now I talked about ADB's finance mechanism, and then perhaps that's relevant to Qinfeng, who was the first panelist of this session. Qinfeng, may I invite you to share your observation, hearing all the panelists and others, and if you can keep that to perhaps 5 minutes, that's appreciated. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Bill. I think I probably start with the question you asked about the law of the digital technology. Again, you know, if we come back to 15 years ago, we cannot imagine we can scale up smart agriculture. It's not possible because digital technology is still very backward. But right now we have the more advanced digital technology. I think it is now give us the opportunity to link the small farmers to the big market. And at the same time, also help us aggregate the smallholder farmers and it can help us scale up our investment. More importantly, number of our project invested, you know, also prove this also give us the opportunity to enhance or introduce the traceability for our food product. That is very, very essential. So I think this digital technology plus financial instruments very, very critical is number one. Number two is I heard, you know, the Wavas agree, lecture-based solution is going to be the key for us introduces the climate smart agriculture with align lecture and the climate and also introduces the integrated solutions among the climate change, biodiversity, conservation, and also food security. Everybody agree on that. Critical thing is how we make a financial and economic case for nature-based solutions. So this is come to my last point is about, you know, the diversity of the natural capital approach adopted by the different MDBs. One thing I want to mention after one of the MDBs signed the statement on nature, actually started from early this year, GF already engaged the Stanford University, started to look the diversity of the natural capital approach adopted by one of the MDBs. They started with the ADB, Inter-American Bank, and also World Bank. Now, today we heard so rich experiences from the IFAD, and also, of course, is the EIB. Of course, we don't forget, you know, those good experiences from our private sector as well. So again, you know, this opportunity, today's session, Chair, the BOU Chair, I think is really offers a great opportunity to see, you know, how vast, you know, and diversity of this electric capital approach we can adopt it, and how we can learn from each other. So again, as Professor Daly mentioned in her presentation, looking forward, MDB need to drive the forces and really enable the future investment along this lecture-based solution. So again, thank you so much, Bill, for your moderating this great session. And of course, I want to also thank Professor Daly for her taking her precious time to give us a presentation. Thank you so much, Bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Qinfeng. So as a moderator, I was asked to summarize the discussion. So let me quickly do it. So first point is that based on the global recognition on the importance of climate actions, and also thanks to the groundwork provided by academia, such like Stanford University, and also organization like IFAD. We do have a great momentum or that policymakers or the managers recognize the importance of natural capital. And that makes us in the best position to mainstream the concept of nature-based solution or even the climate change into our work. However, why development practitioners do benefit from the recognition of importance of natural capital, our challenge remains. Our main client remain as farmers, right? But complexity of solution for them remain as a challenge. Farmers are still at risk, and we discovered that the digital solutions and the risk-sharing mechanism can be a strong tool to overcome risk and challenges, which again, we need to accumulate good working experience on this. And to conclude this, I'm so excited about hearing what you do in the field, but I also know there are so many actors perhaps doing the similar thing in the same field. So as Chin-Fen noted, introducing some kind of mechanism to coordinate not only the multilateral development bank like us, but also have private sector actors come on board so that we can also benefit from their understanding about the risks and experience of reducing risks from their perspective is going to be very important. May not be right now for us, but as you used to mention, it's going to be a long-term involvement. And that's going to really inform us how we can work better in the future. So I would like to, this is a very brief summary, but this really brings us to the end of our session. And I'd really like to give the round of applause to our presenters. Thank you very much indeed. I learned so much, and I'd like to continue to learn from you. And on behalf of ADB team, I'd also like to thank all the participants who inputted your questions, and I hope some of them are answered. And I hope you will also enjoy the rest of sessions. It's a little bit early to close, but thank you very much. If anybody has any burning questions or comments to raise, please do so. I can wait for 10 seconds. Hey, if not, I'm just going to close the session. Thank you very much indeed.